Hello and welcome to Wild and Untamed. I am your host, Lara, and in today's episode, I have Ryan King, who on Instagram is known as Wisdom of Kings, and we are talking all things modern day masculinity. Ryan is an incredible writer on inspiring and very nuanced content in the realms of wisdom, manhood, relationships, motivation, mindset, fatherhood, leadership, and personal growth. He really offers such richness in all of his posts that for me, on the receiving end as a woman, it feels really inspirational. It feels really safe. And I feel like we are moving into realms of polarity again. And so, actually, having men in leadership roles, leading in modern day masculinity, but with the sentiment and with elements of traditional masculinity that have gone for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, with the qualities of honor, integrity, leadership, and it's so powerful. His content is so powerful. And we cover how to embody your king energy. So many women in spiritual realms are asking for, they're calling in a king. And so, as men listening to this episode, we're going to speak into how to really embody that king energy and what masculine leadership actually is and what that looks like in modern day society, and how to spearhead change within your own community and how to be a pillar of your community. We also explore traditional archetypes and masculine initiations that have happened throughout time, and we bring in how you could actually explore or create your own initiations in modern day society. We also dive into relational dynamics with the masculine and the feminine and how they interact, and how to support your masculine partner and how the masculine partner offers support to their feminine. Now, if you're listening and you don't identify with cisgendered roles, masculine and feminine, the work that I do very much addresses masculine energy and feminine energy within your internal dynamics that we all hold, no matter what your sexual preference is, no matter what gender that you identify with. So this is also applicable for your own inner masculine and your own inner feminine, but I do want to just address the fact that we are speaking very much in cisgendered heterosexual relationship. But as I said, this can also address your internal polarity within your own masculine and feminine energy within. So without further ado, we will dive in. Please like, comment, share if something is really resonating with you, and ratings are always welcome. Welcome, Ryan, to Wild and Untamed. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for the conversation that is about to unfold, and just really wanting to appreciate you being here, because I've had so many men reaching out. Obviously, I work a lot with the feminine, and so really receiving this desire for that men have to step into this king energy, into their masculine energy, and not really knowing the channels to actually go down for that. So I love that you're here, and the work that you do and the offerings that you put out with your Instagram and the writings that you offer. It's so powerful and so beautiful and important, I feel, to have these masculine leaders really paving the way and activating this remembrance of like what it is to be a man.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I think that's important. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah. So let's go right into it with what in the modern day, what is it to actually be a man? And something that I really have seen and conflict that I can see in how the masculine feminine work is perceived, like masculinity, femininity. It can be perceived as a little archaic, I think, but actually it's so nuanced and there's so much potency and power in almost returning to those more archetypal expressions of masculine and feminine to really unlock the magic and the power within those polarities. So I'd love to hear from you, like, what is modern masculinity? What does that look like?
Sure. I think in some ways, from a modern standpoint, to me, I think masculinity is more of just like a list of virtues. I think it's a list of qualities, things like decisiveness and courage and just being steady, reliable, strength, things like that. I think the challenge you know, the challenge with those things in the modern world is that we now have a choice to be those things, and those things are hard to be. Um, but if you hypothetically go back 500 years, men had to be that way if they wanted to survive. They couldn't, be unsure of themselves. If they had to go, plant a field or hunt down an animal or defend their property or whatever, like all those qualities, you had to have them to survive. You had to just make a decision. You had to be steady, because if you weren't, you were going to get eaten by the predator, or you were going to get killed by the bandits, or whatever the case may be. So a lot of those qualities, I think, um, weren't optional in the past. Like if you wanted to survive, you had to be decisive, you had to be strong, you had to have courage, you had to keep your word, you had to follow through on what you committed to, because it was survival. And I think the reason a lot of modern men struggle with that is because we don't have those external factors being pushed on us, where we have no choice but to become those things, because those are hard things to be.
Yeah.
um, Especially when it's not required. And I think so to me, that's the challenge, um, with doing those things in the modern days, that men deep down know that they need to have those qualities and they need to be able to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
But unless you intentionally um, unless you intentionally build those things up and curate them and emphasize them in your life, you don't really have the external factors that force you into that anymore.
Yeah.
And so now it's more of a voluntary thing. And the thing that I try to convey in a lot of the work that I write, is that you'll on paper, becoming those things, becoming a man, is kind of a shit deal. Um, and that's one of the things I plan on writing about soon is, like, if you take a young 24-year-old man, and he's got a girlfriend that he's living with, and that he's being sexually active with, and getting all those things, that getting all of his needs met, why commit, why grow up? Like, I don't have to be responsible. I can have fun with my boys and go out and party, or I can play video games, or I don't growing up is kind of a shitty deal, especially for a man, because it's basically just all duty and responsibility. You have to sacrifice all the selfish things that every human being has: selfish interests, and selfish desires, and part of being a man is voluntarily giving those things up, and committing your life in service and sacrifice to your bride, to your children. And there's really nothing on paper that makes that appealing. And until you experience it, and then you get these, and then okay, this is what I was born for. This is what lights me up. This is what makes me feel fulfilled. This is what my purpose is to sacrifice, and to serve, and to give of myself and give of my strength to a woman, to my family, to my purpose. But it's very hard to um, really explain those things to a young man in a way that makes it sound appealing, because on
Mm.
paper it's not it's not exciting, it's not sexy, it sounds terrible, until you do it. And then at the same time, those same men feel lost. They can feel on the inside that something's missing, or they don't have that validation on the inside, that they know that they're a man, they know they have what it takes. And so it's just kind of this weird thing. And I think the challenge, in the modern world, is that we have the option of not taking on those responsibilities and not taking on those duties.
Mm.
Um, Whereas in the past, that option was taken from us. You had no choice. You
Yeah.
had to find a mate and commit, because you had to survive. And that's one of the challenges with relationships in the modern day. I feel like is that we don't need each other in the same way that historically mates have needed each other. Like, for most of human history, you had to have. I remember at the beginning of the movie Braveheart, when he was courting the woman, and she said, "How are you going to take care of this place?" He said, "Well, my sons." And she said, "What sons?" She said, "Well, I was hoping you could help me with that." Like, they needed to have children, and they needed to have specifically, he mentioned sons because, like, he needed physical labor help to build the farm and to survive. And so I think that's one of the challenges with modern men and modern relationships, is that there's so much of it that's optional, that when things get hard, you can just choose not to keep pushing through it anymore. Whereas in the past, like, you had that anchor of, we rely on each other. I can't survive without you, and you can't survive without me. It's division of labor.
And I
Um,
think that there's so much beauty in that, is the nourishment that you receive in those poles, in those roles. And like you said, on paper, it doesn't seem that appealing, but the nourishment that the masculine gets from the feminine, the nourishment that the feminine gets from the masculine through like protection and service, but then the radiance and the aliveness that the masculine receives through a woman who is safe and protected. There's so much gift in that. And I feel like I love what you were saying about it's a choice, right? It's a choice because we're in a candy land right now where everybody can play Peter Pan. There's so many ways that we can escape our body, we can escape our reality, we can escape our responsibilities. And this is something that I really love about what you just said, and the work that you put out is it is a choice. And there's so much power in that choice to stand in such sovereignty and such devotion to being a pillar of society and to being a pillar of your, like, the family, and to really lead from that space. And I think that what you do so well is not only inspire that within men, but you really inspire that for me as a woman who reads your work. Like, you really inspire me reading that. And I know that I've got friends who have read your work as well, who absolutely devour it. And it's that actually, this is what I desire, and this is what I'm worthy of holding, because there's two ways too, right? As women, and I can speak for myself in my early 20s, I wouldn't have held that, and I don't want to say the word expectation, but that bar for this is what I need and this is what I desire. So that it's two ways, right? It's really easy for the masculine or men to not choose that, but it's also women not making the choice to say, hey, this is what I need, this is what I desire, and this is how I need you to show up for me in this relationship, right? So it's this beautiful balance and play between the inspiration and the rising. And I see it as an infinity symbol, right? So this like fluctuation and this dance between nourishing, supporting, inspiring, like, and rising together. And I really feel like that's
it's
that
almost like
king.
it's almost like our hearts and our instincts know what we want when we see it. but we didn't have the words for it anymore because it's like that got lost somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because
And
when
I
you
do,
write it or when you read it, you know, men and women both are like, oh yes, that's it, that's what I've been looking for. But for so long, we've all kind of felt like this disconnect between what we have been told and what we've been exposed to as far as what we're supposed to want. But then we have it and we feel empty. It still doesn't feel right. And even though we've checked all the boxes, it something just still feels off. It's like we've lost the vocabulary for a lot of these things that used to be just kind of understood. And I don't know where that happened, but I definitely think we've lost a lot along the way.
and there's something that you just said as well about ticking the boxes. And I think in relation, it's become something that people seek. Is like, this person has to be X, Y, Z, right? And we tick the boxes, but it's empty boxes, because
Mm,
we haven't been raised in a society that, broadly speaking, and I know that there are anomalies, and I'm very much speaking generally, but it's like what we think that we desire, we aren't actually in presence with how deeply nourishing it can be, and how, like, we tick the box for the sake of ticking the box, as opposed to really being present with the energy and really showing up in that energy.
mhm.
And I think that something that is really powerful in terms of like this rise of the divine feminine and the divine masculine that we're seeing like circulating, and this return back into more traditional expressions of masculine and feminine. I know that in the work that I do, it's this like feminine initiation and really coming into understanding and understanding all of the pieces within us that actually block the relationship that we desire, the ways that we block the love that we deeply desire through the distortions and manipulations that we've learned along the way as a means to survive, or you know as a means to get what we want, but what we think we want, as opposed to actually embodying the femininity that then calls a king to rise. And so I'm really curious as to what it is that inspires a man to rise in his masculinity and to really
Um,
step up as a
I
king.
mean, I think going back to one thing we touched on earlier as far as choice, um, even deeper than choice, I think is just commitment. Like when it comes to relationship, for instance, um, when it's time for you to commit to that woman, that means there's just no going back. It's time to burn the boats and step up and become what you have to be to make that relationship work and to be the leader that that woman needs. And one thing that I feel like our modern society is very individualistic. It's the individual that comes above everything. And the reality of relationship is you're merging into one entity. You merge and you balance each other's strengths and weaknesses and trying to retain your individuality. I'm not saying you have to not become an individual anymore, but the unit of the two of you has to supersede in priority your individuality. That's the hierarchy of how it should be, is who you know you become one person. And so I think going into the relationship, if both parties come to it with that kind of commitment, it becomes what it needs to be, and both people sacrifice whatever parts of themselves need to be sacrificed for the sake of the union, for the sake of what's best for the unit, because what's best for the unit trickles down to being what's best for both of you. And
And
that's very seldomly does anybody say that out loud, but in reality, like as far as checking the boxes, like what we think we want is very seldomly what's best for us.
mm,
I mean, how many times have we gotten what we think we wanted and we weren't happy with it, or we weren't satisfied with it? That's a modern lie. Like, we don't know what we want. We don't have enough experience. We can't look into the future and know what's really best for us. We can have an idea, but really it comes down to commitment. As far as the king energy, um, that's you know th- that comes down to when you think of the word king, the good kings that you read back through historically, um, they looked at it as sacrifice. They looked at it as duty. They looked at what was best for others first. Um, and so to me, the fundamental aspect of the king energy is realizing, like I said earlier, that devoting your life in service to the people that you're charged with, being responsible for, whether it's and a lot of women don't like that terminology, but I think it's important for a man, even if it's just for the sake of kind of a paradigm in the way he's thinking. I think it's helpful for a man to view his wife or his relationship as, I'm responsible for this woman, in similar ways to where, when a woman has a child, she has this innate instinct of, it's my responsibility to protect and to nurture and to, make sure this child is safe until, they're able to be on their own, and that's kind of the inside the house, so to speak, whereas the man guards the outside of the house and has a similar instinct toward his wife, in terms of, it's my job while she's protecting the offspring, it's my job to protect her. It's my responsibility to take care of her for the sake of the children, and some women view that, as like, oh, I don't need to be protected. And it's not, I don't mean it in terms of, a woman can't take care of herself. I think it's just important for a man to step into that king energy, to realize and voluntarily take on that type of mindset of, it's my responsibility to take care of her, to provide for her, to make sure she's safe and protected, physically, emotionally, so that she has the space to where she doesn't have to do the things that I'm built to do. So it's not a matter of capability; it's a matter of, who does it come more naturally to. And deep down, I think it comes. I think it comes more naturally to a man to handle the masculine things. To be singularly focused on threats, for instance. While the woman is inside managing all these various things. A woman can multitask like that. A man can't. We're more like animals or predators. But we're like that for a reason. We're looking for threats, and nothing's going to distract us from that. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of things that just come more naturally. But yeah, as far as the answer to the king energy, um, a good king sacrifices what's in his best interest for the best interests of his subjects.
mm,
It's duty and responsibility. He doesn't. A bad king uses his position to enrich himself, to spoil himself, to take care of himself. A good king lives in service to his people.
yeah. Yeah. And I'm just my brain is going to so many different places. This is a really exciting and activating conversation. And I feel like it's so needed to really address, because going back to the loop of the prioritization of individualistic living, we've taken it on ourselves to be all of the things. And I think as well, you touched upon like women not really liking the idea of being protected a lot of the time, but there is that deep desire often to be protected, yet there's this armor that's been built through the expectation that we men and women need to be able to do all of the things as society has spread out of community or tribal living to more individual and spread out living that I've definitely witnessed as well with my clients and in the collective, this desire for women to soften and to be protected and to actually be looked after by a man, their king. Yet there's this deep resistance of, I can do it all by myself. I can still do it. I want to maintain that,
Well, and
independence. And it's,
here's the thing that's so forgive me for using this word. The thing that's so stupid about that, okay, is that of all the traits for women to have taken on from men, that is the worst one they could have taken on, because men don't even need to be that way. Like everything men are trying to do in the men's space is like, you don't have to do everything by yourself. It's okay to need help. Like men can't even handle that much responsibility and that much burden. Like of all the male characteristics for women to have taken on, that's the worst one, because it's not true for men or women. We're not designed to not need anybody and to be able to take care of yourself. Like we're meant to be in community. We're not wired as human beings to be able to do everything ourselves. Like, and there's no corollary in any practical, like whether you look at it in the military, like one dude doesn't go fight a war by himself. There's specialists that do one thing and this person does the other thing and this person does the other thing. If you look at it in sports, there's different positions. Like the quarterback doesn't also play linebacker. Like the person that plays the violin in a symphony doesn't also try to play the drums. Like there's no corollary to this idea of being able to do everything by yourself in any practical sense. It's a complete fabrication of reality. There's not a real life example somebody can give me. Like a lone wolf starves. Wolves live in packs. Like I could go on for hours, but it's such a lie for women and men, and it really annoys me that women have pulled that one specific characteristic out of modern society, because even men don't need to be that way either. That's something that men fight with other men about. Like, bro, the lone wolf thing and the Marlboro Man idea, like the cowboy that doesn't need anybody, and all. It's like, dude, those are harmful stereotypes for men to try to live up to. So now seeing women take on that specific thing it just irks me, because it's like that's the last thing you need to take away from trying to be more independent and try to be less feminine and more masculine and all that stuff. It's like that's bad for being masculine too. I mean,
yeah. And I love that you've addressed that because, to your point, it's not feasible. We need each other. We need to really surrender this idea that we need to do everything by ourselves and really allow that aspect of whether it's our ego or the psyche or whether it's the beliefs, the patterns, the conditioning to dissolve, to actually come into this space where we're prioritizing love, prioritizing the union, like you so beautifully put a little earlier about, and how I saw it as this beautiful the triangle of like the masculine, feminine, and the union. And in couples that I witness who put that love first, right, the love and the connection, and allow that to trickle down, everything else naturally does fall into place. And when you're prioritizing being the most loving partner, the most loving father, mother, like friend, when you prioritize that, everybody then softens and sinks into the natural roles and the strengths that they play. But there's been such a distrust, I feel, of that in society, or we've been conditioned to not necessarily trust that we will all drop in. And when we really sink into our strengths, it opens up space for, say, the masculine to rise and to really lead when we are not trying to fill that space.
yes. Well, I mean, he can't protect you if you're busy protecting yourself, especially from him.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part is that while all these things sound good in theory, you know, for it to really be applicable in real life, you have to also understand that we're human, so there are going to be times that you rely on me to protect you, or you rely on me to take care of something or whatever, and I'm going to let you down because I'm human. And you have to keep, when I talk about commitment, that's where that comes from. So you have to, it's not just commitment to the relationship, it's commitment to, if you want to bring out the king energy in him, you have to commit to, it might take him a while to become the king. Like a king doesn't know what he's doing on day one. Like there's historically kings, that inherited the throne at 14. It took them, 5 or 10 years to really fully embrace their role and their responsibility and not screw up all the time. And so I think as a woman, my advice for a lot of women, if they want, to inspire that kingly energy in the man, is you got to commit to inspiring that king energy in the man, even through his failures, even through the times where he doesn't act like a king. You can't, as soon as he drops the ball, you can't run and go pick it up. You've got to allow him, space. You got to look at it from the long-term perspective of, like, it's going to take him time to become a king, especially for a young man. If he didn't have a role model, if he didn't have a father, one of the best things you can do to inspire the king is not to rub his nose in his failures and say, I can't trust you, because you couldn't trust him that one time. Just because you couldn't trust him in that one instance doesn't mean you can't trust him. It just means you made a mistake.
Yeah.
And the best thing you can do is just to be clear without judgment and say, hey, in this instance, I don't feel safe, or I don't feel protected, or I don't feel like you had my needs in mind because this happened, and I just want to communicate that to you, that in the future I would, if you would have done this, it would have made me feel more protected. But do that in a way that's not judgmental or passive aggressive or whatever. Just be very direct, and that's been the things that have been most helpful for me with my wife, is when she's just been very direct with me about certain things. And it's like, oh, okay, I didn't know that my lack of response, or my not taking that on, was making you feel that way. If I would have known it was making you feel like you weren't safe, or you couldn't rely on me, or you couldn't depend on me, then I wouldn't have handled it that way. So now that you've pointed it out, next time I'll know to handle it differently, because, men don't just know. We've got to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to, inspiring that king energy, I think the main thing I would tell women is to just be really patient. I mean, it's going to take him time to learn those things, and he will become that if you keep letting him. But if, as soon as he lets you down, you go and protect yourself again, well, now he's not going to have a chance to protect you next time and make up for it, and evolve. So you have to be willing to continue being vulnerable, as long as you see him working toward it, as long as you see him trying. um, and and a lot of times just saying, here's what I see in you, here's what I see you being, that you're not being right now, but I believe that you can be, as opposed to chastising.
Yeah. And that is something that I feel is so important, is with anybody, right? Is reminding them of the power that lies within them. Because, like you said so beautifully, we're all human. We all fuck up, right? We all make mistakes. Like, it's natural. And you can also still hold your beloved, you can still hold your partner and communicate directly with, this is like, this was painful, this is why, and this is how I would love to feel, and this is an invitation to rise, rather than swooping in and building the armor up and saying, you didn't do this, and now I need to protect myself. And I think that comes from that thread that we touched upon of the expectation that we have to be all the things for ourselves, rather than inviting and allowing for other people to actually hold the space and step up for where we do need support, where we do need that skill set or that person to show up in a way that we aren't necessarily able to for whatever reason, right? And I'm really wanting to invite the conversation around initiations, because we've spoken into like what it is to be a man, and like it being a choice, and really stepping into that like devotional space, men and women, right? If both partners aren't willing to devote to the love and the relationship, then there can be an imbalance. If there's that desire to protect, but you're not willing to be protected, it then becomes very difficult to navigate. So it does, I feel, take both partners to devote and get clear on like where we're heading, like what the direction is, and what devotion to love and union looks like, and then allowing it to unfold. But something that I really adore, and going back to like ancient times, ancient practices where men and women would be initiated into, like, I teach the feminine arts, right? So it's the initiation of the feminine and how to really soften in your embodiment, and how to open and to be vulnerable and to be in your expression and to be in your radiance, which naturally feeds the masculine. And so I'm really curious as to what initiations look like. Like, what could anybody listening, any males listening, like what would an initiation into the masculine look like? Or rites of passage is what I'm getting at. Like, what can people listening practically explore to step into that energy?
Yeah. That's the really challenging thing, and there's a lot of men in the space that are coming up with these rites of passage thing, because it's difficult to do on your own. If you look at um, historically, the rites of passage, a couple of examples that I like are, like knighthood. First you became a squire. Before you ever became a knight, you became a squire, and you served a knight for years, maybe a decade, and you learned. So it's more than just a rite of passage. There's a lot of ingredients to that, where you become the squire, and then as the squire, part of being the squire is being around the knight and seeing what's expected of a knight, what qualities he has, um, learning the skills, learning the manners, learning the codes, things like that. So you learn the information, and then at some point you're given an opportunity to say, okay, now can you take what you've learned and do it on your own? Can you take these skills and can you go accomplish a quest, and go challenge yourself? And then when you overcome that quest, they typically had like a vigil where they had to stay in the church for 24 hours meditating on what it was to be a knight. And then after they've gone through all that kind of formula, then the rite of passage is, they were welcomed into manhood by their other knights and said, we used to see you as a squire, now we see you as a knight. And so there's this sense on the inside of that young man that, he knows the skills now. He's been taught those things. He's now used those skills to accomplish something, and then he's been recognized by the men around him as no longer being a boy, but being a peer. So I think a lot of men, modern day men, have. I hear a lot of feedback from men about having the imposter syndrome. They know they're a man, but they don't feel like it on the inside. They feel like it's fake, and I think most of that just comes from the lack of men outside of them that have confirmed that for them and said, we see you as an equal. And that's not just in warrior classes. We used to have apprentices for like being a blacksmith. You would go apprentice with a blacksmith. He would teach you the skills, and it's a very similar pattern, with and these are things that have held true across cultures that never interacted with each other. They had things like this in South America, while similar rites of passage and rituals were going on in Eastern Europe. And I mean, there were commonalities between all those things, and it starts with kind of that formula of being taken under the wing of another man, um, taught certain skills and expectations, and what's expected to be part of either the warrior class or the merchant class, or the smith class or whatever. And then at some point you're recognized as an equal by those grown men. And so that's really, I feel like, where a lot of the problems come from in modern masculinity, is not having like a codified version of that, where um, then that kind of goes back to not doing it on your own. Having men around you that teach you and guide you, and then officially welcome you as part of the brotherhood. So it is very challenging to go through those rites of passage, and manufacture them on your own. Um, I think you can learn from those formulas and take them on yourself. You know, humble yourself if you're trying to become a good salesman. Humble yourself and go work for somebody that's a good salesman, and say, hey, will you teach me how to do this? Even if it means you work for free for a year or two, just to learn the skill set. Say, teach me what you're doing. How did you do this? Why did you do that? Like, find somebody to mentor you, and then start testing your skills under his tutelage. um, and then at some point he said, you go close your own sale and you do it on your own, and then that person says, hey, you know what you're doing now, you're ready to be without me. I think you can do stuff like that. You just have to realize what that formula is, and then go seek out situations where you go learn something you don't know how to do, or and then I think the key is having someone around you. So like, if I was a young husband, I would go find a marriage that I admired and say, and go talk to the husband. If I was a 25-year-old man that just got married, I'd go find a 40-year-old man and say, hey, guide me in this. Will you be my mentor for my marriage? And when something goes wrong, can I come talk to you and have him guide you, and you learn those skills? But that requires vulnerability. That requires admitting that you don't know everything on your own. That requires finding someone that you have to having the courage to seek them out and say, I need help. And then it requires the humility to do what that person tells you to do, because they're not going to mentor you for very long if you don't listen to the advice that they're giving you, if you think you know better. So I think we used to have those rites of passage embedded in culture naturally, and I think the only way we have, the only alternative we have now is you have to recognize your need for those things and go kind of create your own, in a sense.
Which is almost like an extension of the quest, is to actually, because the world is so broad and is so just expensive, we actually have a gift right now in terms of social media or the internet, where you can really go and seek tutorage from the people who you may not have who you may not have had access to when the world wasn't as expensive. So you really have this extension of the quest, is to really seeking out, okay, like, who is the embodiment of the perfect marriage, right? And I know, like, quote unquote, there is no perfect marriage, but just seeking people that you're inspired by. And it is a candy land in terms of what is out there. But I feel like the piece that really landed as you were speaking and sharing is the humility and the willingness to fail and to learn from those failures, which really beautifully ties into what we were saying within marriage and relationship, and being willing to actually not have to be right all the time, to actually
Right.
have that humility to say, oh, okay, thank you for reflecting that to me, because now I have more knowledge around whatever the subject matter is because I failed. And you have lived experience in how not to do something, which is something I think that, again, with this individualistic society that we've been raised in, is this terror, like this fear of failure, right? And I know that you'd said at the beginning, when it was like knights, or when we were in like tribes or cavemen, the stakes were higher with failure, so there was a lot less margin for error for failure. But I feel like this is something, a thread that we've pulled through.
Well, and one of the things in those older cultures, is that you couldn't hide your failure. If you were a squire for a night, you were with each other 24/7. I think the biggest reason why we're afraid of failure now is because we have the option of hiding it and pretending like we didn't. And for most of human history, we didn't all have our own houses where we could go pretend like we were something that we weren't. Like, we lived in a village with other people. So when we were fighting with our spouse, the whole village could hear us yelling at each other. So there wasn't any pretension. There was no pretending. So that I think is just a function of modern society, where we have the option of putting on this facade, whereas that wasn't really an option for most of human history. It's like, if you were a blacksmith, if you're an apprentice blacksmith, like, you're going to screw up. It's like, try playing high school basketball and not letting the coach see you fail. Like, give me a break. The coach is going to be, correcting your failure all day long. So I think just the only reason we have that in modern society is because we can pretend like, we have these spaces where we can go hide our failures that have never been part of humanity. And then, as far as humility, I mentioned earlier about, the relationship stuff is easy when you prioritize the union over the individual. Humility is easy when you prioritize the goal over your pride. Humility just happens if you care so much about becoming a blacksmith or a knight or whatever. Like, or let's say you care so much about becoming, a famous musician, and that means you have to go screw up in front of, the best guitar player in the world. You're not going to hesitate for a second if that person's going to teach you how to be a better guitar player, because you want so badly to be the best guitar player you can be. It doesn't even come across as humility. Like, I gotta humble myself. Like, you can't wait to go humble yourself and learn from the best. Are you kidding me? But to me, it's easy to be humble when you care more about the goal than you do about your pride. Just like it's easy to have a good relationship when you care more about the unit than you do about the individual. It takes care of itself when you want something badly enough. You know, it never even comes across as like, I have to humble myself. It's just like, it it's something that you seek out eagerly, because it's like, this is a chance for me to learn. This is a chance for me to get closer to being who I want to be, because this person that knows that's already there, there's this person that is already in the place that I'm trying to get to. He's going to give me a shortcut to getting there. Sign me up. The idea of, having to humble yourself doesn't even come into play. You're eager to humble yourself. I think the challenge is people don't have a clear enough vision for what they want, and they don't want it badly enough, because if they did, they wouldn't hesitate to humble themselves.
Yeah. And that's so, so powerful in terms of just that devotion to that which is higher, that devotion to not the instant gratification that we're so saturated with, like getting really clear on, he'd said at the beginning, the values. And even if they're values that you don't necessarily, if you're listening and you don't feel that you necessarily hold, but it really inspires you, or maybe it maybe pieces of this conversation have triggered the fuck out of you and you're like, oh, like, and you've got your backup. Great. Like, take that as an invitation to get really clear on what do you value? Like, what is that piece that you desire to devote to that is higher than yourself, that is outside of your pride, that is outside of your ego, that may actually offer you more fulfillment than the way that you're living right now? And to your point, when we live in this society where it's so easy to hide these pieces, that's where the imposter syndrome comes, because the more layers we pile down, like within ourselves, the more pieces of ourselves that we try to hide, the more disconnected we feel from our soul, from ourself. And that's where we feel empty, even if you're living in a life that, you know, others would dream of. It's empty because there's this deep disconnect from self. And so really inviting anybody who's listening to get really clear on the values that you desire to hold, and take it from the ancient. Like, I adore like ancient culture and understanding and how pieces work and move together and play in the archetypes of the masculine, the king, the squire, the knight. Like, what do those look like to you if you project into, okay, like, how do I perceive the king? How do I perceive the knight, and the values and the the values that they hold? Same with women, like archetypal, like, what is the mother? How does the mother express? How does the maiden express? The crone? Like, we get to play in these realms and get really clear on the embodiment of those pieces. And then, like you'd said, seek somebody who embodies them. Seek somebody to guide you and to humble you in, and call you out, and to be really, really fucking honest, because we can't keep dancing around these pieces and expect to be showing up in our highest when we're so willing to like try and sneak and avoid and like contort ourselves around not actually firstly being honest with self.
Yeah. And one of the imagery that I like to think of, you know, and this kind of threads back through like individualism and, you know, being independent and all those things is, you know, I like to think of it as like rungs on a ladder. You know, is that nobody's really ready to be on their own until they're, you know, until they're like 80 and you're at the top. You know, like all of us need, ideally, and this is hard to do in the modern age, I mean, but ideally we all have somebody who's a rung above us on the ladder that can help us reach the next step, and we have someone we're teaching below us that's a rung lower on the ladder that that we can help teach them the next step. And the idea is that, you know, that there's a chain of people that are constantly moving up, and then you know, as someone passes away, you know, you're now the patriarch of that ladder that you're in control of. You know, like, you're the only one left and you've learned everything that you can learn, and now it's your job to pass that down. And when you pass away, there's somebody. So it's almost like just like an escalator that just kind of, and then when somebody dies, it starts back at the beginning, and you kind of just go back through this pattern. You know, in an ideal world, that's how it would work. You know, is that you have somebody above you and you have somebody below you, and, you know, the person above you has somebody above them, and you're all holding each other accountable and preparing each other for the next step. You know, because you know, I'm 38, so I've got two boys that are 11 and 13. So, you know, I can talk to a younger dad that has an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, right? I can talk to, you know, a newly married man that doesn't have kids yet. Like, I can speak to those things. I don't know what it's like when my kids leave the house. I haven't gone through that before, right? And so I need someone above me that I trust, that's been through that, that if I have questions, if I run into something, that I can go to for the parts that I haven't experienced yet, that I haven't done yet, that I haven't learned from yet. You know, I haven't had a kid get married, you know, and so, like, as much as I talk about certain things that I know, you know, I spend most of my time talking about things that I know, but there's still a whole lot of things that I don't know, that I haven't experienced yet, that are just theory. Um, and ideally, we have people above us, and that's supposed to be our fathers or our uncles or our older brothers or whoever. But we don't all have those things. But in a perfect scenario, that's how it should work. Is kind of this the imagery of that ladder where there's rungs, and you're kind of all working through that, and there's somebody above you that's got a little bit more experience than you, and you're also mentoring someone behind you. I think both of those things are important. Having somebody to be mentored by, and having someone that you're actively being a mentor for.
And I think that that adds to, and I hesitate to use this word slightly, but like to the sensation of purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're receiving and you're giving and you're that portal for what is alive right now in the present. And you're embodying, like there's no space in that for imposter syndrome because you're open to learning and you're passing down like what it is that you have learned. And so you're very much then anchored in the present moment in what you have embodied. And by sharing the lessons and the trials and the tribulations, just like if you were in and you pass these nuggets of information down in your tutorage of the squire, right? It's that passing down of knowledge through your lived experience that actually really supports in feeling that purpose and then being open to being the best that you can be in every moment, while also holding compassion for the moments that you do fuck up, the moments that you do fail, and that being okay and not giving yourself such a hard time about that, just taking it as a lesson. Okay, and now I know what not to do. And that's this, as you were speaking, I was just feeling so much richness and fulfillment in that. And it sounds relatively simple, yet so many people aren't seeking that or doing that.
Oh, and I mean, for me, especially since I started writing, and so I've only been writing like in the public sphere, doing a lot of this stuff since January. And my wife will tell you, like, I've become a much better husband and a much better father since I started writing about it. There's something about having to teach it to someone else that I might have done a lot of those things sometimes before, but until I wrote about it, I never really, really like understood it at a practical level. I was just kind of reacting in instinct. And so sometimes I would react the right way and sometimes I would react the wrong way because I hadn't really codified, certain things that I valued until I wrote about it. And then all of a sudden, now that I write about it, it's like, man, I don't want to be a hypocrite. And so it helps me be more accountable too. And I think the same, you don't have to necessarily write, but just mentoring someone else kind of gives you this accountability to the person you're mentoring. Like, I don't want to let them down. I told them to be this way and I'm not behaving this way. So it kind of gives you this external accountability um, to someone that looks up to you. And I think that's been really helpful for me as I started writing. And I think it would be really helpful for a lot of men, and maybe women too. I don't speak to women a lot just because I'm not a woman, so I don't really know. I don't know how much this stuff kind of overlaps, but I know as a man, um, I think it would be good to have not only a mentor but someone you're mentoring, because I think it kind of gives you this it almost elevates your level of talking about the king energy. It's like I feel like that's growing. That's how you can kind of foster that king energy, is by having someone you're mentoring and realizing you're in a lot of ways responsible for setting a good example for them and for giving them good advice. So you have to really think through what you're saying, and try to live those things out.
And I think that something that I hear a lot in my sphere with the masculine feminine polarity is that the masculine is driven by purpose and the feminine is driven by love. Like masculine is driven by freedom and the devotion to purpose. And I love that you just shared that your wife had reflected back to you that you're like a much better husband and like father since you've stepped into deeper purpose, right? Deeper purpose with sharing, mentoring others, and inviting you to stand in that integrity. And if you think about all of the archetypes and the examples, like a king has purpose, right? He's leading his kingdom. And so really, if anybody is listening and you're really curious, my invitation to you would be like, okay, what do you desire for your purpose? Like what purpose? And it could be protecting a family, right? That could be your sole purpose, or it could be part of your responsibility and the weight that you hold. And as you were speaking as well and sharing, like the more that we share our purpose and the more that we receive tutorage or guidance on leading and living in that, we hold more weight and we build strength through the weight that we lift, and we hold like physical weightlifting, right? So if you're not calling yourself into deeper embodiment and deeper to a purpose and holding the weight of that and the responsibility that comes with that, then of course you're not going to feel fulfilled, or you're going to feel this imposter syndrome or lost or not necessarily know, because there's not that clarity around what do I stand for.
Yeah. Well, and you know, to just add on that, I think that's a really good point. You know, I think um especially, you know, in the modern world, you know, I think we all on some level, you know, with everything that's gone on in the past few years and all the upheaval and division and you know, every just war and famine and disease and violence and, you know, all the just all that stuff. I mean, I think now more than ever, you know, one of the things that I emphasize and I'm really trying to activate in other men is not just to take responsibility, but to go and take on as much responsibility as you can bear right now. You know, beyond just your own family. Like if you've got your own family taken care of, and even I don't mean completely taken care of. I mean, if you're at a point where you're coasting, it's time for you to go take on more responsibility. It's time for you to go, you know, mentor a foster child. It's time for you to maybe look at fostering a kid or coaching a baseball team or do something to contribute to all the kids out there that don't have fathers, you know, because we need more. And so that's the challenge that I lay on myself, and I try to embody that and I try to live that. And that's what we need is we need the reality of the world right now is that, you know, the US where I live in, and specifically the Western world, you know, the United States leads the world in fatherlessness in single parent homes. Um, whether that's fair or not, whether that's our job or not, to go raise somebody else's kids. If we want the world to improve, if we want to pull back from where we're at, then we have no choice but to go take on that responsibility voluntarily and take on as much responsibility as you can possibly bear. And then as soon as you're good at bearing it, go take on more. Because it doesn't just give you purpose and it doesn't just light you up, but that is what men need to be doing, and that will keep us alive. You know, we need purpose, we need a battle to fight, and that's king energy, is taking on as much responsibility as you can possibly bear for the benefit of something bigger than yourself, for the benefit of your subjects, for the benefit of your country. um, you know, and so that to me, I get a little bit discouraged sometimes because it's all I can do to just get a man to take responsibility for himself, much less go take on responsibility for, you know, as much as you can possibly handle, because the world needs it, and you will rise to the occasion. You know, just like if you keep lifting a certain amount of weight, your muscles will adapt. But the only way they're going to adapt is if you push yourself past the point you think you can handle it.
I love that. As you were speaking, like I got chills and I actually got really emotional listening to that because I just think it's so beautiful and so needed, so needed. And yeah, like I'm feeling all of the emotions with that, like it just feeling into the potentiality of like if people really can step into that, like what can I carry, what can I bear, like how can I support more deeply, if and this, like going into a war analogy or like a basketball team or a football team or whatever, like if somebody else is like having a bad game, you don't just like abandon them, like you take on more responsibility in the game and you show up more to support your team. And
Yeah,
so like just really, really feeling
that's a
that, and
great
thank you.
analogy too. And think about how often when we see those things happen, and it usually only happens in sports and in movies. We don't, in history, we have historical examples, but how often are those the moments that light us up, that speak to our souls? In movies, they give us chills when somebody steps up and, you know, takes on the responsibility or fills in for the guy that got hurt or whatever. Like, we're wired for that. That's what our souls are missing. That's why we feel empty, because we want something bigger to fight for. And what I'm trying to just point out is like, guys, we're in that right now. This is the thing to fight for. It's time. Whether you feel ready or not, it's time to step up and take on as much as you can take on to try to pull us back from the brink that we're in as a society. There's so much pain and there's so much, you know, trauma and people hurting, and like, it's got to be more than just like, oh, I'm going to heal myself. Like, yeah, heal yourself, but we need it done in 6 months, because there's 1,000 other people out there that are hurting. They aren't even trying to heal themselves yet, and they need you too. And you can either look at that as that's not my responsibility, or you can look at that as those are the characters and the stories in movies and in history and in sports that inspire us. When we see that, we're like, that's what I want. I want a battle to fight. I want a mission to go accomplish. Um, we're living in a moment like that where we have that opportunity, and we're, for a lot of us, we're pissing it away, feeling sorry for ourselves or being angry or being bitter or sitting in unhealed trauma because it's somebody else's fault, or just being numb and playing video games and zoning out, or you know all these different things. And it's like everything you've ever wanted, everything that your heart has been calling for, about a bigger purpose and a battle to fight, is we have it right now. We're living in that moment. This is your chance to step up and do something about it. And that's what I'm trying to activate in as many people as will listen.
Yeah. And just to really consecrate that, it's so much more simple than we think it is.
Yeah.
To your point, like we think we have to go and do these big gestures and live these like big things. No, it comes back to the simplicity of like, who are you day to day and how are you showing up? And
Mm-hmm.
how can you support those around you and actually invite more of that community living and that expansion of responsibility and that bearing of weight to really stand as a really solid pillar for society? Because like you just so beautifully put, like that's how we change, that's how we shift, by everybody doing their bit to
Yeah,
serve
exactly. If you,
the
yeah, it's
great.
it's like going, it's like going viral. Like if 20 people listen to this and take action on this, and they serve 5 people around them, that's 100. And then if each one of those 5 become that pillar for 4 or 5 people around them, now that's, I'm not good at math, whatever the numbers are, but it wouldn't take long. It wouldn't take long for this to spread if everybody just stood up and said, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not ready, but I'm going to go take on as much responsibility as I can possibly handle. And even if that's small, even if just start. And as you adapt, just like you use the analogy of, lifting weights, as your muscles adapt, you'll be able to handle more. Go grab more. Every chance you get, go take more responsibility, and you're going to feel more alive. And that's the paradox of the selfishness that we have. We're looking for our own purpose, and the more we do for ourselves, the less fulfilled we feel. That's that king energy, is to stop thinking about yourself. You'll be fine and you'll feel great if you just go take care of other people and you go take on as much responsibility as you can. You go serve somebody else. You won't be worried about yourself anymore. Just like in relationship, like if you serve your spouse to the best of your ability and you put their needs first, you're not always going to have that reciprocated because they're human and people are selfish. But by and large, it's the law of reciprocity. Like, people are more often than not going to respond and return whatever and reciprocate whatever you give them. So the less you worry about yourself and the more you invest fully into that other person, the more likely it is that they're going to return that back to you. Whereas if you're
And
thinking about
then,
yourself the whole time, the more likely they're going to think about themselves. You have to choose which cycle it's going to be, because it's going to be one or the other.
yeah. And then that ties so beautifully to the beginning of our conversation, was choice. The simplicity of choice and that awareness in the present moment of, what am I choosing right now? Who am I choosing to be? And it starts there.
And that's, and to me, I think the distinction there is choice versus reaction. Are you going to just react to what's done to you? Or are you only going to be a good person when someone's good to you? Or are you only going to stay true to your values when someone is honoring those values to you? Or are you going to choose, like, this is the kind of partner I'm going to be to my spouse because I have to answer to myself, regardless of how they treat me. I'm going to be like this, regardless of it. I'm going to go take on as much responsibility as I can, regardless of if I get anything out of it or if it's immediately beneficial. It's not about how other people react. So to me, the important distinction is the distinction between reacting and choice. Are you going to be a good partner or a good spouse when they're good to you? Well, anybody can do that. That doesn't make you special. That's literally what everyone on the planet would do. It's what you choose to be in the moments where it's not easy and they don't deserve it and it's not reciprocated in that moment. Are you still going to stick to being who you've chosen to be?
Yeah.
Because those are the hardest times. That's when the rubber really meets the road.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is a beautiful, like, mic drop. A beautiful mic drop to complete this beautiful, expansive conversation. And I'm just so grateful that this unfolded and that we managed to make this happen. Yeah, where can people find you? Where can people find your work and get more of this wisdom and leadership and seek your guidance?
Right now, I'm just on Instagram. Like I said, I've just gotten started in January, and so I'm just learning that platform. So for the time being, I'm on Instagram, and it's at the Wisdom of Kings.
Okay, beautiful.
So.
And I will put all of the links and all of the things in the show notes. But I just want to invite, is there any one little piece of parting wisdom that you desire to drop? If you could put it into a sentence. There have been so many wisdom drops throughout this, but if there was one more thing that you desire to bring to anybody listening, what would it be?
I don't know if I have one off the top of my head. My mind is so focused on the stuff we've already talked about. Finding another one would probably be hard, but I think the one that would come back to me that just kind of jumped out during our conversation is just go take on as much responsibility as you can, and just make those choices to choose, serving others, and just trust that that you'll get taken care of in that process. You don't have to worry about yourself as much as you think you do.
Yeah. And I love that you've just really anchored that in, because it was really, really powerful. Really powerful. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And guys, go check out Ryan's page. Go and devour all of his posts. He's amazing, and I look forward to hearing from any of you. If you have any feedback on the episode, if you want to send DMs, ask questions, we're here for it.
Yes.
Yeah, we love to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. This has been Wild and Untamed, and I am your host, Lara. If you loved today's episode, if you had all of the ahas from all of the mic drops, and it really resonated with a part of your soul, please do rate the episode. Listen to more of the Wild and Untamed library. It really helps us out. And like I said, it is such a joy to hear from you. If you have anything that you feel to share with either myself or with Ryan, then you can find all of our links to get a hold of us and be in contact at the show notes. And I look forward to dropping in with you next time on Wild and Untamed.